Hello, this is a Scottish Council and Archives presentation about copyright for community archives. My name's Elspeth Reid and I'm an archivist, and this presentation is intended to help you with some practical suggestions that will help you respect other people's rights in the collections you hold, while also letting researchers use your collections. First, good cataloguing practice will help you enormously. And then anticipating use of the collections and having a policy on how you manage copyright for these uses will help make this all much easier. Let's start with cataloguing practice. Your catalogue should include the information you need to decide whether something is in copyright or not, and help you identify who the copyright owner is and how long copyright lasts. So you need to catalogue what kind of work each item is, the date it was created, and who created it. These are all elements you would want to put in any catalogue anyway, so this should be relatively straightforward. Knowing what kind of work something is important because that affects which bit of copyright law applies. So make sure you state in your catalogue whether the item is an original or a copy, and say what it is. So it could be a photograph or a work of art, a bundle of letters, a published book, an article. Whatever it is, put that in. And of course the date is important, and in some cases this can help you determine whether copyright has expired or not. As a very rough rule of thumb, if the item is less than 120 years old, there is a good chance that it is still in copyright. If it's older than that, there is a reasonable chance that it's out of copyright, but that's not certain. There are extra elements to add for copyright purposes about the creator of the item, if possible. So, are they still living or are they deceased? And if they're deceased, when did they die? This is important because how long copyright lasts is normally calculated as 70 years after the date the creator died. And this applies even if the copyright owner is someone else. Next thing you need to think about is, was the work created as part of their employment? This matters because the employer will be the copyright owner of anything created as part of someone's job. So, for example, the copyright on postcards usually belongs to the company which produced them, rather than to the individual photographer. And the copyright on a report by a manager in a company belongs to the employer and not to the employee. And the third thing to think about is, was the work commissioned? Now this matters because up until 1989, the commissioner would normally hold the copyright, unless there was a contract which gave the copyright to the creator. If the work was created after 1989, there are different rules. This can be really hard to prove one way or another, but for example, studio photographs probably were commissioned. Architectural plans of private houses might have been commissioned. Either way, it's helpful to record in the catalogue whether the work might have been commissioned, and if so, who might have commissioned it. Now all of this is good cataloguing practice. Record as much as you can about the person who created the item, ask the donor for information, but also go and do some research to fill in the gaps, because there will be gaps. And make sure you take a note of where you found your information. Good cataloguing will also help you to respect the moral rights of the creator. Moral rights were only established in law in 1989, but essentially this is simple politeness. Always say who created something and get their name right. So if you're putting items into an exhibition or cataloguing them, be accurate, credit the right person. Imagine how you would feel if someone read your research and then sent it into the local newspaper without crediting you. Or worse still, if the newspaper credited the person who submitted your research instead of you. Imagine as well if someone took your work and changed it without your permission, especially if they changed words to something you would never say, or changed a photo by adding an image that you disagree with or a slogan that you disagree with. You can understand why someone would be annoyed by that, so don't make changes. There's another right of privacy where the Commissioner can object to making private photos or films public. So if you have photos or films taken after 1989, it's sensible to ask before you put them on your website or in an exhibition. Once you have set up good cataloguing practice, the other good thing to do is to work out what kind of use you might want to make of the collections and then develop a policy that everyone in your organisation can see and follow. There are lots of reasons to make copies of the collections. Do you publish a journal, a magazine, or publish on a website? Do you want to contribute to other organisations' publications? Do you want to let researchers take copies away, whether photos on their phone or photocopies? Do you want to let visitors take photos of exhibitions? Do you want to generate some income from selling copies? Maybe copies of photographs, maybe coasters, mouse mats, cloth bags that use designs or images from your collection. All of these uses involve making copies of the original, so there is a potential for infringing copyright if you haven't thought about this properly. The best way to avoid copyright infringement is to ask the copyright owner for permission. Be clear about what you want to do and make sure you have a record of what they decide. That way you won't have to keep asking them, and everyone who needs to know in your community archives can find out without bothering the copyright owner every time. It's good to have a form for this, and there are forms available on the Scottish Council on Archives website. Remember, you do not need permission to use the original item in an exhibition or for research, but you do need permission to make copies. If you can't identify the copyright owner, and you really have tried, then you need to think about the risks. The big risk is actually reputational. Will other people trust you to look after their records if you are cavalier about how you use them? Will they entrust their parents' photos to you if they find you haven't asked if it's okay to use someone else's photos on a coaster? The other risk is financial. If you make copies without proper permission, the copyright owner could take you to court, and that's expensive. So you need to decide whether you are simply going to ban all copies that you don't have permission for, or you're going to manage the risk by limiting the copying to things that are not likely to upset the copyright owner if you ever do find them. It's reasonable to allow copying of part of a longer work for personal study. If you put a copy on your website, then have a takedown policy. Be willing to take the copy down if the copyright owner gets in touch. It's probably not a good idea to use copies to generate income without permission, and don't infringe the moral rights of creators. Both of these are more likely to offend or upset copyright owners and lead to financial and reputational losses. So finally, once you've identified what you want to make copies for, how you get permission, and what you want to do when you don't have permission, you need to write it all down. Having a written statement of your policy is something you can refer to when you need it, and it will help you to avoid upsetting either your copyright owners or the people who want to make copies of the collections. So here are the main points you should consider including in your policy. First, always respect the moral rights of the creators. Say how you are going to make reasonable efforts to identify the copyright owners. Say how you will seek permission to use items wherever possible. Say what you will do when you can't find the copyright owner. Tell contributors to your own publications that they are responsible for clearing copyright on what you submit. And tell researchers what they can and can't copy. The Scottish Council on Archives website has a model copyright policy which you can adapt to suit your circumstances and decisions, and you can find more information about the technical side of copyright on the SCA website, as well as suggested books and other resources.